Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. My name's Amy. I'm from Only Single Player, so it's an absolute
Mhm.
pleasure to speak with you today,
Oh yeah,
Andrew.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, so just to start with, I thought I'd ask what most excited you about working on a project like The Outer Wilds?
Oh, I'd say I think the fact that music is so ingrained into the gameplay with different characters like the banjo player and the harmonica player and like everyone else and the fact that that theme is kind of connected through the planets and it all comes together like the time loop throughout the time loops. So it was cool to like be brought on board like right at the beginning. Um
Mm.
and be able to kind of develop this world based on like one main like really short like it's only like 8 bars long. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, so you've mentioned the harmonica and the banjo. Are there any unusual sounds that you might not normally hear that you used in your compositions that players should look out for?
oh yeah, there's the Nomai it's like the ancient aliens of the world. There's some really interesting textures in there that I created mostly with guitar and like different kind of looping pedals and stuff. So I'd say that music is incredibly different and a lot more ambient than the the Hearthian themes in the game.
Mm. To speak more to that, you mentioned a looping pedal. In a game that is so heavily focused on a 20-minute replay loop, how important was something like a looping pedal in creating the atmosphere you wanted to achieve?
Oh, I think there's kind of like a day night cycle on Timber Hearth that where the music only plays during the daytime, so that definitely is like synced in with the day night cycle of that planet. The the looping pedal that I like the looping pedals that was using for the textures are more like to create just like an atmosphere kind of behind um, all the music. So I'd say it was really important for textures, which is kind of funny that you mentioned that because of
Hmm.
the time loop aspect of the game.
Yeah, really interesting. I'd like to ask, I mentioned in the last question, but what kind of atmosphere and emotion were you trying to convey with the compositions? And do you feel like you achieved that in the end?
Um, yeah, Alex and I were really going for kind of this like a little bit like a feeling of nostalgia and like familiarity to the fact that as the player kind of discovers that you're stuck in a time loop, you start to realize why the music is kind of like it's wistfully sad at times. And I try to just create like this like it gets the storyline gets pretty deep halfway through, and I just wanted to kind of set up the mood like in the beginning, so the player kind of starts to realize why there's kind of like this emotive like lilt to the music throughout the game.
Cool. That's really interesting. Thank you. Having looked at your credits, from films to film trailers to video games, television, and commercials, they're all very different projects to create for. Which one is your favorite that you've worked for and why?
Oh, my favorite? Oh, that's really tough.
Hmm.
um I mean, right now I'm really excited about Outer Wilds and the reception of the music I've been getting on like Twitter and social media. So I feel like my favorite project is always the one that I just finished,
Yeah.
which is a classic thing to say, but I think it's really true. So right now I'm really proud of Outer Wilds. Before this, like the game I did, Eclipse Edge of Light, I was really excited about that. The music in that was also very like I think a lot. It's been interesting to work on so many projects that are based around kind of human existence.
Yes.
And both of those titles, in the end, are about human existence and like your relationship with like life and death. So it's fun to like and exciting and really introspective to go down that path with the music.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. So the last project you worked on as well was also a video game. You've worked on quite a few titles in the video game industry. Are you a gamer yourself? And if so, what would be your ideal franchise to compose for next?
Oh, my ideal franchise to compose for next. That's tough. Like I
Hmm.
love space. And I love being able to write scores that are really minimal, but with like intense or complicated textures behind it. I really like Playdead's work, like with Limbo, and I feel like that composer like
Yeah.
really nails the sound design and composition and like the atmosphere. So a project like that would be really exciting to work on next. I mean, I've always been a big fan of like Uncharted and Shadow of Colossus and those larger than life things as well.
Hmm.
So
Oh, well, hopefully one day we may get to hear some of your work in there. Who knows? Um, So you've mentioned it before, that a beaten up banjo was your immediate inspiration when you started to work on the Outer Wilds. Why was the unique sound of a banjo so important to you as a part of this score?
I think it over the very early pre-alpha cycle when we were just starting. Yeah, like I remember like I recorded one piece of music that we didn't end up using in the game called Campfire Song based around the banjo. And then the second piece of music I wrote for the game, like back in 2012, was the main title sequence. It's like the minute of music that just kicks in during the opening credits. And that theme ended up being put into the gameplay, and then ended up becoming like the travel theme as well. Like I was just moving it around, changing the tempo. So it really the banjo like became the heart of the score, and especially because there's like the banjo player that you can find in the game. That's
Hmm.
also like important to discover. Um, and it just felt it was really interesting to have like an old beaten up banjo, but put through like reverb and make it like really spacey. It just seemed like something that no one had really done before, so I wanted to do that and create like kind of a quirky atmosphere to the
Hmm.
game.
Well, it definitely does. So that's really interesting. So you mentioned you came on during pre-alpha. Did you just say that was in 2012?
2012, 2013, or don't quote me on that. Like I
That
think
was
it's
around then.
2012. Yeah, so like it's been 7 years on and off. Um,
Wow.
but
With such a long development cycle, such as that, how much of your music then influenced how the game developed around that? As you've said, it was really highly atmospheric, and the music is such a big part of the emotion. So, how did those kind of work together then, if you've been on board since those really early days?
I'd say the main thing that really got ingrained is the fact that music does not play often, but when it does, it's purposeful and important. Like the beginning of the time loop, always Timber Hearth kind of opens up and sets the scene, and then at the very end of the time loop, like you have about 90 seconds left to go, so that'll kick in. So it really a lot of the music is like signifying something, or like if you find
Mm.
like discover knowledge, like some sort of piece of information, like often, or if you get to a location where there's something that you should be paying attention to, like music will kick in. So it is like ingrained pretty close into the gameplay to like kind of have like little hints that you're getting close to discovering something, since the whole game is based on the exploration aspect
Mm.
of it.
No, very cool. So the Outer Wilds does have that really unique gameplay loop that spans 20-minute cycles. How did you create a score that feels both familiar and new at the same time?
uh, i I think mostly I tried to do that with the having familiar instruments, but with very unique textures. So like all the campfire music starts off so basic and simple, and as you're exploring and getting into like the quantum mechanics part of it, discovering quantum locations and finding out about the nomai, the music gets weirder as you go. So it kind of goes from like this very charming quality into, like, I try to reflect that with like unknown, like confusing textures where you can't even think of what instrument it could even be.
Really cool. Really cool. Um, so your past credits in terms of composing for video games have included work on the Madden NFL games. So how did your experience on something like The Outer Wilds compare with a project like that?
There's actually a lot more common things to connect between the two, because on that I was doing additional music and Mark Petrie was the main composer. So for a lot of that game, there's actually a lot of quiet, like atmosphere. Like I just created guitar textures in the background to really support his music. So I was doing ambient music and Madden as well, for that year of the game. Well, Mark wrote like all the main score. So it's interesting how composing ambient music can be used in something that you would think is as not really based on the music. Like the Madden franchise is about, like, it's like a football game. So it was cool to know that that's something that exists, because I had no idea going into it that I'd be creating ambient textures for that game. So
Yeah, cool. To speak more to your past work, you've worked on a lot of prominent film trailers and I say film trailers, but even television as well, for franchises such as Star Wars and the Avengers. What's the difference between creating the atmosphere for an entire project and experience such as The Outer Wilds, as opposed to creating an atmosphere for a much smaller sample for what is a larger experience that comes out of these trailers?
The thing with trailer music that's so incredibly different is you have to like convey your idea within a first few seconds. So, and like a lot of times, like you'll get asked to write like a 2-minute track that they'll then cut up even down to like 1 minute or so. So you have to really think simply and have it build, and really like, it's like really embracing going like super over the top and larger than life, and just making the music like incredibly extreme. And like it's fun to think about it. Like I think the best way to think about trailer music is if you were like a little kid in the movie theater getting ready to watch Avengers. Like I try to put myself in that position and like think what I would think was like incredible when I was growing up, and just do that.
That's a really
So
interesting perspective to take. So thank you for that insight. I mentioned this earlier, but I'd like to speak a bit more to it. You came on board with the project really early on. So how did the compositions change or get created as the game developed? Did you develop a different process in the earlier stages through the later stages, or anything like that that really changed the way it sounded? But I do know you mentioned like what you created back in 2012 did end up sticking with the game. So how then did your process change?
we didn't get into the quantum stuff until a year or so ago. So that was really exciting to do and create textures that I wouldn't have. I feel like over time, like everyone grows in their artistry, and it was really cool to see how not only the level design was changing and getting more complex, but I was able to create more complex textures behind that to support that. But like through and through, we did kind of do a little overhaul of the music where I re-recorded a couple things. I'd say like a couple starting in like 2016 and 2017. But in the end, like there were some original, like in the main title sequence, I kept in the original riff I recorded and played over myself, like on one of the final sessions, like a month or so ago. So it was a cool bookend to like have my past self playing banjo with my current self in a game like based on a time loop. So
Yeah, wow. Thank you. That's really, really cool. Um, You mentioned textures a lot. Um, so throughout the game and throughout the experience, how do these textures change, and how would you describe these textures in terms of what the player is experiencing?
They're very otherworldly, and I think they're supposed to spark question, like playing into the mystery of the whole storyline. Like I want it to spark questions and curiosity. So I try to get a feeling of like very unfamiliarity and like a sense of wanting to explore the unknown. So there are parts where the game can get a little spooky, especially on Dark Bramble, but a lot of it is more about being curious and wondering where, like, I wanted the music to reflect, like, I didn't want it to frighten anyone, but I wanted to
Hmm.
have people feel very like curious about becoming uncomfortable in these while you go from planet to planet.
Cool. What is probably your favorite thing about the game? And it can be something you've created. What is your favorite part of the experience as a whole?
Oh, just the way that the music is represented physically within the game, where it's diegetic music based on the musicians. The fact that Alex did that was really made this like quite an incredible project to work on, because when the music's there in this game, it's always there and meaningful, and it's not just wallpaper. Like the fact that we were able to design like a universe based on that principle was that's what made it so exciting for me
Mm.
to talk about and just think about over all these years. And the fact that everything came through in the end um, made it a really wonderful experience.
Awesome. Lastly, something probably a little bit less serious. Is Masioka as funny as he seems?
Yeah, he's pretty funny.
did
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, did you get to work with him a little bit throughout the project, or?
Yeah, he would come in and kind of talk to us throughout the years when he wasn't shooting, just to kind of meet with the team, and like we'd all go out to dinner every now and then. Um, and he kind of helped out with like he mostly worked with Alex and Luan, I'd say. But I would meet with him from the time to time, but it would just be more on like production schedule and things like that.
Well, cool. That's really interesting that you did get to have that experience as well. Thank you so much. You have a really interesting insight, and it certainly is a game that is so heavily intertwined with the music. So it is a pleasure to speak with you and hear a bit more about the inspiration behind it. Because it certainly has been a really interesting experience to hear your background and perspective on it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.